Hello, everyone. This is Dr. J, and I'm the host of the Sexuality Space, and I want to welcome you. My silent co host, Misha Elliott, is taking care of business for us on the back end here. She is my co host, virtual assistant, and all around, I can do anything person. So she's in the catbird seat. For those of you listening to the replay, the Sexuality Space is live every Wednesday noon Eastern Time on Twitter. I'm going to invite our guests to speak. Dr. Mintz, you should see a notification that you can click and you'll be coming up onto the stage. I have created a sex positive community here on Twitter where we talk about different sex topics, meet CEOs of sex companies, sex educators, researchers, and writers. And I want you to see me doing my work in the daylight as I integrate sexuality into everyday life. Greetings to everyone. As a reminder, this is a recorded space which will live on the Twitter timeline. And it is also repurposed on my website, FlowGen playlist, and on YouTube. And I see we have one of our regulars, Ramon. You have a very new picture there. How fascinating. Please note that this space is equipped with its own chat feature located in the bottom right corner so that you can ask questions as we go along in the space. And you could also DM Misha or me with questions. Last week, we started on January 4th for 2023 discussing New Year, New Mindset for Sexy Plans. And this week, I am honored and delighted to host the famous sex therapist and UF researcher, Dr. Laurie Mintz. And she is the author of the book Becoming Cliterate. But I have to tell you up front, you just might see a Florida rivalry happening here, UF versus FSU. Hi, Laurie. Welcome to the space.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, this is great. So, did you know that I went to FSU?
I didn't until just now, but I think we can set aside our Florida rivalry and join around sexuality.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm excited that our mutual acquaintance, Dr. Lindsay Harper, connected us so we could have this conversation today. I'm spending my time these days providing editing for their erotica services, and I always like to start talking to sexuality professionals about how they got into their space and what they're doing. And let me just make one comment here before I launch into what I want to talk to you about. We will be doing the interview with Dr. Mintz, and I won't be taking any speaking requests from anyone until the very end, and maybe we'll have a couple of questions at the end, but this is going to be an interview that I'm doing with Dr. Mintz. So I always like to find out how people landed professionally in what they're doing. And just to give you a sense about that, in 1976, I dropped out of college to the dismay of my parents because I didn't know what I wanted to get a degree in. And I ended up working for Adam and Eve packing condoms in Chapel Hill. And it was so wonderful to work with someone who had a master's in public health who did their work specifically around sexuality. And it was his master's thesis that determined I'm going to start this business. And he did wonderful philanthropy his entire life until he died last year. And from there, I ended up with 3 different degrees in sexuality that have taken me on a journey for this year will be year 47 in the work of sexuality. And it's been fun and exciting. So I want to hear and I want you to tell us, how did you land in the field of sexuality?
Well, that is an interesting story, so I was so glad to hear it. I never really thought this was where I was going to go, but as a way of a background, I was raised by a way ahead of her time, sexually sex positive woman, my mother, who passed away a few years ago. And I have so many stories to illustrate that. I'll just share one really quickly. When I was about 9, I knocked on the bathroom door when she was taking her very private, precious night bath. We were never supposed to interrupt her. And I was desperate, though. So I knocked on the door and I said, I have to talk to you. And she was like, what's so important? It's my bath. And I confessed I'd been touching myself down there because I'd heard it was a terrible thing to do. And she sort of rolled her eyes and said, oh, please Everyone does that. Just go and just make sure your door's closed. Now leave me alone. I'm taking my bath. It was just so, like, that's the kind of household I was raised in. So I didn't even realize how unusual it was till much later. So I've always been comfortable with the topic. And I always also wanted to be a psychologist, a therapist. Went to grad school for that and specialized actually in eating disorders. And for many years, I did research and saw clients who were struggling with eating issues. And of course, body image would come up and sexuality would come up. And I always asked my clients about sexuality despite having no training, which, still to this day, sadly, both physicians and psychologists receive too little training. And they would always say, hey, if you hadn't asked me, I wouldn't have brought this up, but yes. So that really motivated me to really learn more and self-teach and read and go to workshops, etc. And then at one point I just thought, there's a lot more to it, but I don't want to take up too much time with this question. I thought, I have been helping my clients, my friends, myself, all these women in this age range who say they're losing their desire. And I'd done a deep dive into the literature. So I wrote my first book, A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex. And that kind of started me down a path where I got more and more immersed in the field, started teaching grad seminars in sex therapy, an undergrad class in psychology of human sexuality. And that's where I was very upset to learn that a whole generation had not gotten any education about the clitoris, thought they were broken because they weren't orgasming from penetration alone. And that led me to write Becoming Cliterate. And I've just been fully immersed in the sexuality space ever since.
And boy, can I relate to that. I was thinking my first job back in 1980, I had been trained specifically with Lonnie Barback and Bernie Zellbergeld, and I was training physicians and PAs and nurse practitioners on how to work with clients and patients in a very sex positive direction. And back in those days in medical school, they actually got, if you can believe this, 10 hours of sexuality. And Dr. Harper tells me that that's now moved down to 1 hour. So when I think about all the human sexuality classes that I taught in college and knowing that we may be the only place that was the permission location to even, have the topic, and hope that we can address enough of information to get somebody a baseline, a starting point where they can feel good about who they are and start that investigation and discovery and exploration for themselves. So I get all excited to have somebody else, who knows what that feels like to help people move along that track and feel really good, which, kind of moves me right into the next question I wanted to ask you. What is your absolute favorite thing about what you do?
Exactly what you said. Like, really seeing people learn about their bodies, become empowered to feel sexual pleasure, and and seeing how life altering that is. One thing that surprised me was my students, readers of my book. I knew I was giving information to help them be empowered and orgasmic and pleasure seeking in the bedroom. What I didn't realize is the effect of that. So many times we get told, oh, learn assertion, empowerment in life and then apply it to the bedroom. But what I found, which is just so favorite and exciting and meaningful to me, is that so many people have told me that once they become empowered in the bedroom, they're unstoppable outside of the bedroom, that it starts there, their confidence soars, and their whole life is positively affected.
Wow, boy, you just tied into some of the training I had with Dr. David Snarch that I think he would have agreed absolutely. If people start their learning, moving, growing processes and they do it in the bedroom, they are unstoppable, because if you can address your personal self and sex in relation to another person, you can do anything.
Yes,
And
exactly.
Yes, and I think that's really cool. How did you um how did you go about focusing in the topics for your book and becoming cliterate? I mean, I know you did research, but I'm kind of interested in how you put it all together.
Oh, okay. So, well, I mean, it all, like I said, it started with my students' pain and their empowerment, is seeing how many of them felt broken. And so I started teaching in my class to becoming cliterate, to cliteracy, to empowering women to orgasm. And I would teach them about their anatomy, and I would teach about masturbation, and I would teach about sexual communication and mindfulness, which is, huge. We know you can't, as I found of saying, you can't have an orgasm when you're trying to hold your stomach in or wondering how you look. So these were the things that I was teaching my students, and I would get feedback that it was working, that thanks to my class, my students were becoming orgasmic. And I thought, I will put this, I mean, it into a book. I will take what I'm teaching and put it into a book, to help empower individual women in the bedroom. But also, what was really important to me was doing a feminist analysis or a cultural critique of why women are having so much problem orgasming, why we have the orgasm gap, and creating a combination of, a call for cultural change overall and in individual bedrooms.
Well, I love how you created, I think, the phrase the orgasm gap. So, can you go into a little more detail for folks that may be unaware of
Yes,
what that actually has to do with?
absolutely. So the orgasm gap, although I guess a lot of people credit that to me, but I have to say that wasn't my term. It was a researcher named Wade back in 2005. I think my work just popularized it. But the orgasm gap is the consistent finding in the research literature. And we don't have enough research on non people who are gender queer, non-conforming, trans, but the research is on cisgender women and men. And when they get it on, the women are having way fewer orgasms than the men. And in the original study by Wade, she didn't ask the type of the sex, just general. And she found that 39% of women versus 91% of men said they usually always orgasm during a sexual encounter. Like, wow, that's a gap. And then other research, continued that and found that the gap is biggest in hookup sex, gets smaller in friends with benefits, but it never closes altogether. That even in relationship sex, women are having way fewer orgasms than men. One recent study was 95% versus 68. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's because our bodies are difficult, elusive. But other research, right, makes that so clear. Two other lesser known orgasm gaps make this very clear. It's not our bodies, it's the way we do heterosexual sex. And that is that women have way more orgasms when engaging sexually with other women, and women have way more orgasms when they're alone. And my favorite, but depressing, but favorite study to cite was a small study with women who identified as bisexual. And so these are same woman, same body. And they were asked, how often do you orgasm during first time hookup sex with a man versus a woman? And when with a woman, 65%, when with a man, 7%. Whoa. So that
Wow.
really tells us the problem is the way we do heterosexual sex, not our bodies. And of course, we know from way back when in Cher Height's work, and it's been replicated, that when women pleasure themselves, 94 or 95% reach orgasm easily. And within minutes, there's a gap between solo sex and partnered sex as well.
Wow. Well, let me tag on that because what you don't know in terms of the work that I've been doing with Rosie and the book that I'm about to have come out is that you identified I don't even use the phrase sex scenes when I'm doing writing with authors. I use the phrase scenes with sex because I think what happens is we get in a headset of the normative heterosexual direction, and it doesn't allow for the opening to create sexuality from a totally different way. And it's had authors rethink character development, sex history, looking at things, in a different way. And it allows them to do it as their individual person and as the author who's doing the writing. So I've continued to use all of that sex education work to help write these stories that are going to be more realistic about how women go about the process of pleasure for themselves and how they do that with another partner. So, one of the questions that I have for you, because I know how I felt about this, what was it like when you got the information of the anatomy of the clitoral body? And I say this knowing you have cool jewelry on today.
Well, I took the jewelry off when I realized this was audio only. I had a vulva necklace and clitoris earrings. And I want to answer that question, but I also want to say I love what you just said about the language, if I might, because that is so important to me. And in Becoming Cliterate, there's a whole chapter on the language we use and how it reflects and perpetuates the overvaluing of male pleasure, the devaluing of female pleasure, like how we use the word sex and intercourse like they're the same, which they're not. And that's not the act through which most of us orgasm, or how we call the entire genitals a vagina, and thus linguistically erase the parts of ourselves that gives us the most pleasure. So I love your switch of language, and I do think that's so important. And so, and kind of leading right into how did I feel? I was like amazed and excited. But interestingly, there is a book, I don't know if you're aware of it, called A New View of a Woman's Body. It came out in the 70s, and they used to sell it with a speculum attached to it.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
Rebecca Chalker, who wrote The Clitoral Truth, was one of the authors of that book. It was written by the Federation of Feminist Women's Health Centers. And they talked about the internal clitoris in that book, just a couple lines. And it never got the attention that it needed. And then, of course, the brilliant Helen O'Connell came out with her research and her studies. So I was just like, I mean, it just speaks volumes how little we know, and how, as a sex educator, it bothers me, but I have to do it. Sometimes I have to explain the external and internal clitoris by saying what part of the penis they correspond to, because people know a lot more about the penis.
Yes.
Um, but it's such a powerful, amazing organ. And in fact, I think it was Helen O'Connell who said we should stop calling our genitals by different parts, right? The vulva, the vagina, the clitoris. She said the clitoris is so essential to that everything in our genitals is related to the clitoris. We should just call our entire genitals a clitoris, and I love that.
Oh, that's great. And it's funny. I was telling someone the other day that, we think about I was there at ASECT when the G spot, everything was happening, and they did an anatomy. Here's a person, watch this squirting occur, and that sort of thing. And I think about all my life of these different pieces of information of how it's come forward, what do we do with it? And when I think about what the G spot idea has to do with, and think about the clitoral body and its legs and its bulbs, and you sit on a motorcycle and it vibrates all the way through, and you're thinking, yes, this really is just one big area that when activated, boy, does it feel really good.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I was communicating with Beverly Whipple about the G spot, since she popularized it with her book, and
Yes.
it's actually the scientific name. And I know you know this, but I'm going to say it for the listeners. The actual name for the G spot is the clitoral urethral vaginal complex, but because it includes all those parts, and a large part of the G spot is the clitoral legs.
Yes, yeah. And it's funny. I feel like we're doing education all the time. So here we are on Twitter saying all these wonderful sexual words in a way that people are going to feel the energy of both of us, the commitment that we have for let's get accurate information out there so that you can get the type of sex that you want to be having in your life and put it together, as positively as we can. And I guess one question that I had is when you think about your personal stumbling blocks for your book coming out and that sort of thing, what things hurt you about the process? Because I know that we take two steps forward, one step back, one step forward, four steps back. What was the difficult part for you in
Well,
this?
the two most difficult parts were writing the anatomy chapter and then some very initial negative reactions. So let me just briefly explain both. I cried many a tear when writing the anatomy chapter because, and I thought I knew my stuff, but when I took a deep dive into the scientific literature or was trying to direct my illustrator to draw, I kept coming up with misinformation. For example, the inner lips are if you follow them up, they attach to the clitoral hood. And some sources said they attach in two places, some said three, some said one, some said it depends on the woman. I was at a loss. And then also when trying to draw the clitoral bulbs, they looked like balloons in some places, they looked different in others, and then I got the actual MRI that Helen O'Connell did. They looked like little worms. I was just like crying. And I called my editor, who is a brilliant woman. And I said, I don't know if I'm qualified to write this book anymore because I don't even know how to, explain the anatomy because of all these contradictions. And she said, well, that's why the book's needed. It's not you. If you're coming up with all these contradictions and misinformation, that's why this book's needed. And just explain that to the reader, and that this is the best working knowledge we have now, and it will probably change. And that's what I did. But oh, many a tear trying to write that chapter and get these pictures drawn. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, but when the book first came out, I did get a,
And that was 2019. That was
yes, I
2019.
did get, well, 2017 for the hardcover, 2019 for the paperback. And I got some very negative comments on social media. One really got to me. This person said, I mean, I got called nasty names. That didn't bother me because, but one person said, don't, women are being stoned to death all over the world. And, you're worried about, orgasms in the clitoris. Like, what a waste of time. And I took it to heart and I was really upset. And then a very dear friend of mine said, no, Lori, you know, this is all due. Sure, women being stoned to death is not as serious as women not having orgasms, but it doesn't render this unimportant. And it's all related to the same root source of fear and hatred, of fear of women's sexuality and misogyny.
Absolutely. And it's funny, when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind was this year, the World Association for Sexual Health did a specific declaration for sexual pleasure. And it's the first time that pleasure has been identified within the term of sexuality. And I think when we talk about quality of life, I'm one of those folks. I'm teaching a class right now with a new tool that I created called Purple Sex Reflection Deck for Women. And I'm a proponent of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And I have 9 sexuality topics, and we're looking at how all of those come together. But the bottom line is quality of life, how we balance what we do and how we feel good about all that we are, and balancing the sexuality in that.
I love the way you said that, and I completely agree with everything. And it is so, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, sexual pleasure is so central to life and life satisfaction. It's not insignificant by a long shot.
Yeah. And, I feel like, we're out here doing the pleasure work, and here's how we can help you in that particular direction. So you have that book that came out. Do you have something on the, into the future that you're working on that we don't know about?
I do, but I'm keeping it under wraps for now.
Oh, I love it. You're teasing. That's my line of work. I
Well,
love
I
it
hope the
when
teasing leads to immense pleasure down the right line.
I absolutely love that. Well, you are doing teaching at this point in time and still doing human sexuality teaching?
Yeah, I'm teaching the psychology of human sexuality at the University of Florida. Taught my first class yesterday. It's always exciting to meet a new group of students. There's about 170 students in the class. And what I've seen over the years is they are coming in with more knowledge than they used to, which accurate knowledge, which makes me so happy. And I've also been doing some, and this is due to Dr. Harper, Lindsay Harper. Thanks to her, I've also gotten on the speaking circuit with a lot of gynecology training programs and conferences, and teaching busy physicians how to intervene quickly with sexual health, because there's so much that can be done so quickly. And that feels super meaningful, because I feel if I can educate one gynecologist, I might reach thousands of women.
Well, you're right. And I think that's one thing that Dr. Harper has done well by being a physician herself and positioned where she can talk to different people in the same way that her app, Rosie Wellness, is all about getting um, accurate, scientific, factual information to women so they can understand how their body works. I'm hearing that it's going to all of those OBGYN, and then each of those folks can recommend the app to their patients. And, it's just this wonderful network of everything coming together. But when I go back to my past life of doing all that training, you just got me all excited that, yes, I love it that people are, listening to what you have to say, and they're aware that they don't get information enough to work that process to help their patients. And I'm always a resource person where they go, okay, about this, who can I contact? What group will help me with this? Da, 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 da. So I feel like I'm the human Rolodex because I've been around for so long going, I think these people may still be doing this work. Let's check there and see what they're doing. But I'm just tickled that you and I got to have this conversation today. And at this point, we just want to let everybody know if they would like to come up and ask you a question, if that's okay
Of
with you.
course.
Um, I'd like for people, I'll check you out to see who you are, because my work here has been about creating a safe and permission filled place with genuineness and authenticity and respect for one another. So, in that direction, I want to put that out there. We have two of my favorite people in the world who came up. And Laurie, I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Thompson, who is an author, and she is. Her business is all about book marketing. So she has come up here, and she's also a specialist and does work with sexual survivors. So, hey, Rachel.
Hey, really great conversation. Lovely to meet you, Dr. Lori Mintz. I've seen your book and I'm going to absolutely get it now. I just wanted to share a funny little story. It was actually kind of creepy, but I won't get into the great detail. But I had written something or shared something, a quote. I honestly can't remember. It was like 10 years ago, about how 90 to 95% of women do not orgasm from penetration only. And some guy decided to mansplain to me how women's bodies work and how I had clearly never orgasmed properly, but he could make that happen, yada, yada. And I blocked him. And then I did a radio interview, and the guy showed up in the interview. It was like on Blog Talk Radio with somebody to make sure that I knew how to pleasure myself or how men can give me pleasure. I was like, dude, seriously. But it is interesting how this is the stereotype that is perpetuated especially watching, not female directed porn, because women just love it. And some women do, and some women can orgasm that way, and lots of us cannot. And it was just so interesting to me how there are people in this world, men especially, who feel that they have to be in charge of our own sexuality.
Oh, I'm so delighted to meet you, and thank you for sharing that story. It's unfortunately, right, so common and so upsetting at the same time. In my book, I have a chapter written just for men called "You Don't Have to Have a Clitoris to Be Cliterate," and
Love it.
and I sent it home with a client for her partner to read once, and the partner basically said, "That's BS. That's just one theory. No, it's research based. And I all my other girlfriends have. You're just doing it wrong." And it's like
Yeah.
that kind of attitude is just awful and upsetting. So I'm sorry you experienced that.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. But it wasn't the first time either.
Yeah, and unfortunately it probably won't be the last either.
I know. I know. But I just wanted to share that. And I just got your book
Oh,
on Amazon. So thank
well,
you.
thank you. Let me know what you think.
You bet.
See, now we're going to be having this wonderful community that says you need to go to chapter X in Laurie's book when you need to talk about this. This is going to be your specific resource that we have to have. And that's what this kind of networking too, Laurie, has to do with. While you see the avatars down below on your phone so you can see who's listening, there are lots of people that are listening that you aren't seeing because they are listening directly from their desktop, which you can't speak from in Twitter Spaces. You can only listen. And then people may have the link and they may be online listening to this. So we have a whole network of people that are getting good, solid information through this specific direction. So I'm delighted that you are here today and we're having this conversation. Ramon, I'm inviting you to speak with your new tiger, cougar, I don't know what head that is on your avatar.
Okay, so first things first, and thank you for putting this topic up. I absolutely love it, as you know. I'm actually sitting here with a new student of yours who has also been listening and enjoying this. So,
Oh, excellent, excellent.
yeah, yeah, she's having a great time. I asked her if she wanted to ask any questions, and she deferred. She said, although I have some for my gynecologist. So that's
There we go. There we go.
um okay, so yeah, my interaction with this, well, first and foremost, I love my partner and I want us to experience the best connection that we can. So this is always good information for me to hear. And like your guest said, you're right. The information out there runs the gamut. For me, I actually have gotten some feedback on some writing of people saying, "Why are you overcomplicating this?" Or, men just, it needs to go back to, as Rachel said, needs to go back to men doing what they know how to do, and women not complicating it. And it's like, well, yeah, that hasn't worked. So, so anyway, and I'm not sure she's ready for me to go buy one of those special pillows to have on the couch, but that describes or is actually shaped appropriately um, for this part of the anatomy. But yeah, I just think we need to talk about it more, and I love that women are gaining more and more traction every year to put stuff like this out there on the table and get it heard and get it talked about. And yeah, it sounds like a really cool book, and that she's quite a resource. So thank you for bringing her to the table.
Yeah, well, you are welcome. Thank you for joining in and thank you for having your special person there with us too. Hello. I'm doing the hellos in the background. Um, Laurie, I had a question. I was thinking about what Ramon was saying, and I am the parent of one child who happens to be male. And so, as we were looking at our growing up life together, one of the things that was important to me to be clear with my partner about was that I could not demonstrate for my child how I would be appreciated in the world, that he would only get that piece of information from my partner in terms of how he saw me as a person, a human, a woman, respect, information, and that sort of thing. And so it was an interesting process being a sexuality professional to do all of the work that we have done together to grow together down, I don't know, almost, well, heading into 40 years. And thinking about what's the best message that we can help men receive in order to help everyone.
Oh, I love that question. I just love that. And I really think that, you know, except for those few, mansplaining people like Rachel talked about or I've experienced, I think the bottom line is that most men really want to pleasure women and that they're, in fact, there's research showing how much they base their self-esteem on it, but due to misguided images and false media, they're suffering as well because they're, at least sexually, right there, they're trying to do something that isn't going to work, last long, thrust hard, and they're getting anxious and their self-esteem is depending on it. And it's Ian Kerner in his great book She Comes First, which is really an oral sex how-to manual, really talks about how freeing it is for men to not think that their penis is the essential tool for women's pleasure, and how that while it's a bitter pill to swallow at first, that it can be really freeing. So I think we need to give accurate information to women and to men about women's pleasure because it enhances the experience for everyone. And then I also think what you were just talking about, really giving the information from a very young age about respect and communication and consent, and that sex, even that old baseball metaphor, like we're the playing field, we're not even anything, like we're the bases, like changing that metaphor to that sex is a shared experience of respect and connection between two people, and to not think that teaching young men sex is not something you do to someone, it is something you consensually do for pleasure with someone.
Yeah, I love it. Fluid activity. We're moving together, making decisions as we move along, sharing, the sensuality and all of those different things. So yeah, I'm on board with
I
that.
knew you would be. And we definitely, this is so delightful because I just feel we have so many. I mean, you've named some big people you've worked with that have been my role models and that I've looked up to for years, like Lonnie Barback, and Schnark. So, I mean, I just feel we're very aligned with our beliefs and our mission. And it's so delightful to chat with you.
Oh, well, this is great. Ramon, I see you have your hand up. Go right ahead.
Well, just to add to the perfect things that she just said, you're right. As a guy, I feel like I'm more measured about what is viewable and physically measurable. Whereas, and yeah, growing up, I didn't worry about what was going on with my mind or in my mind or any emotional thoughts about what many things were. And of course, the biggest sex organ in the body is the brain. So right there, yeah, I think guys, I'll just speak in general, kind of blow past and just say, well, I'm gonna be quote the guy. Um, but also, I want to say for me, one of the great evolution points in my understanding was a good, complete description of the clitoris, the legs, the hood, how that's all interconnected and interplays with the other body parts down there. And I agree everything needs to be age appropriate, but I would really love to see that get put on the table earlier. I think guys would appreciate that connection between how we all start with the same set, and then as we turn in, as we're, growing in the womb, we become more male or more female, and those things turn into these things. I know I never got that. And I think that could really be just such an important first step towards connecting where sensation and desire and enjoyment come from.
I could not agree with you more. And in fact, in the Netherlands, they do teach that in their sex ed early, and they also talk about pleasure, consent, and no surprise, they have a smaller orgasm gap than we have, and they also have less sexual assault and coercion.
It's funny, Laura. I've always said that if people were more sexually happy, we would have less violence in the world.
Yeah, I love that. I think that there's definite truth to that. And if we taught men that sex wasn't something that they do to people, we would have less sexual assault as well. And that
It's funny. I hadn't thought about, and Ramon, I'm gonna pick on you for a second because I know you'll get a kick out of it. But I was writing down words, and you used measurable and blow all in the same time frame here. So your sexuality writing is coming through here. So I had to giggle about that.
Well,
But,
you're
but
welcome.
Laurie, I I think that how we can use our language, and I assume, do you know Katz, what's his, I can't think of his first name. He's the sexual assault person who used the idea of how we take direct objects and active and change it to passive. And then when you change it to passive, everything drops out for identification of sexual assault that,
yes. Hmm.
yes. And I think that, we don't spend enough time looking at the language. And I think I never expected at the end of my career that I would be looking at writing as a component to help make some of those changes. And, I hear people say, well, in this particular book, we have to write in this genre because this happens and that happens. And I stop and I go, but somebody created that. Somebody came up with that as an idea. Why can't we create a different construct? And within that construct, we're going to talk about fluidity. And there isn't a quote, quote, main course idea that this is the before, during, after, with the idea of the male gaze, going on. And sometimes I think that's the leadership place that people in sexuality stand up in ways that for me, haven't expected that I was going to be standing up in.
Yeah.
And I take it you probably feel that way too about what you're doing.
Yes, and I really, like I said earlier, I really resonate with the language piece, which is why, like, I have a whole chapter in my book. I do think the way we speak both reflects and perpetuates the misogyny and the devaluing of female pleasure and culture in general. And I do think changing our language, like going back to sexual assault, or sexual coercion. Like, sexual coercion has a different meaning than coercive sex, right? Sexual coercion is a form of coercion. Coercive sex makes it a form of sex, and if it's not fully consenting, it's not sex. So that it's not subtle to me that the impact of language and how it does reflect our culture and can change our culture. So I love what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. I was listening to one of your tweets earlier, and you were talking about some new research um, about how much information people actually have about the clitoris.
Yes, I did. But Donna, I'm gonna tell you, I hope we haven't had a misunderstanding. And if we have, I'm gonna apologize publicly. I had this on my calendar for a half hour, and I scheduled a client at 12:45
Oh, no
who is
problem.
now
No
in my waiting room. So
problem.
if I messed up, I am so very sorry.
That is not a problem. And I will absolutely say thank you for being with us today because I know what it's like to have people waiting on you. And I just want to thank you for taking time out to be with us today and to give us all this wonderful information. And I hope at another time we can come back and do it
I
again.
would love that, especially if I have misunderstood and I'm cutting this conversation short. And even if I'm not, I would love to come back because I've never been on a Twitter space before, and I'm finding it wonderful and empowering and exciting to meet new people and to have this conversation. And I'm so very grateful that you invited me.
Well, thank you. Well, you go take care of your client and we will talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Lori. Just hit the off button and you're out.
Okay, thanks.
So, Ramon, would you like to make a sum up statement about what you thought about today and Rachel too? And then I'll close out.
Um, Beautiful content, well orchestrated. I thank you so much for providing it, and I'm thankful that my little friend is here next to me, getting to enjoy it as well.
Perfect. Perfect. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Rachel, got anything you want to add here?
Yes, ma'am. I went ahead and shared a BuzzFeed article on one of your tweets about this space that talks about. I'm not picking on men, it's just funny where men think periods come from and how they work. And if you want a
Yeah.
good laugh, right,
Okay. Well,
go ahead and read that.
anytime we don't know, which is that we're ignorant, we don't know how something works, the things that we create for how we think it works is always fascinating to me. It's almost like being the imagination in a writer's world. Well, it could be this or this or this or this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That
And,
makes
and,
it.
and I'm sorry, not to pick on men. There's a lot of women, especially older generations, who are very misinformed about all of that as well. So it's important that we teach our kids this stuff.
Well, and we're looking at it from that cohort direction. And as I said, this is 47 years in the field. And I look at what all the changes have been. If I just look at it by decade and
Yeah.
then put all of that together as chapters of a book, it's absolutely amazing to see what has changed, what hasn't changed, what used to be one way and is now something else. And then we get new information. And how can we take that new information and new research to get people the information that will make their life better and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you being here today. This has been exciting.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. And I'm so proud of you, Donna. I mean, we've known each other for, gosh, 10 years probably. One day we will meet live and in
We
person.
will. And I hope you're not getting all that rain. I think Ramon is. I hope you're not getting it.
Yeah, I have a little break right now, but it's been crazy. But thank goodness we're fine. It's just very, very wet. So I'm trying not to drive unless I absolutely have to.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mish, go ahead. You have your hand up.
First, I'm going to need a copy of this book. So I
Yeah.
need to add that to my wish list. Second, I think the three of us redheads need to triangulate and just
Yes.
meet in Austin and we'll just stay at the Suns. So
Cool.
that
I
way
will.
I get to meet both, you know, we'll all be in the same place. We'll all get to meet and he'll be overwhelmed with redheads.
That's so funny. I love it. I love it. That sounds great. Well, thank you, Rachel. And oops, someone else. Let me see. Oh, Melissa. Add as speaker. There we go. Well, hello, Dr. Melissa. There you are. Hey, Melissa.
Hi, I just wondered if I dyed my hair red, can I come too?
Yes.
You don't need to dye your hair to come.
You have the aura. We'll just put the aura of your red hair there and you'll be all set.
Do have a redheaded aura, it's true.
Well, listen, I know you came in here at the end. You will have to go back and listen to this space and tell me what you think because Dr. Mintz was unbelievable. And to think that she's only 2 hours from me is like, oh, this is pretty wild. So I'm excited. And I guess that's where I'm going to do my summation for the day. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, taking time out and being with us. And as always, thank you to my lovely silent co-host, who I love it when she gets to speak. And thank you, Rachel and Melissa and Dr. Laurie Mintz for speaking. And Ramon, yes. I would love it if you would subscribe to my newsletter or my YouTube channel, and also to tell you that tomorrow on the Moan app at 4 p.m. We will be having Purple Sex and Erotic Whims with Dr. J, and I will be interviewing Ramon, so everybody can be there to hear about that process. And yes, Ramon, I'm making an outline, so it'll make sense for you when we get there. But I'm not sure what our topic is for next week, but do keep an eye out for the announcement, and you'll see it on the timeline. So everyone have a delightful day, and we'll see you next week.